What's a local legend/horror story in your town everyone collectively believes or tells? That our local homeless guy, who was actually pretty famous, was on national TV a couple of times, was secretly a millionaire who went crazy when his wife died. Just a dumb story people tell because they think it's cool even though it's ridiculous. Edit. From all the people who recognize this story, till every city in the world has their own juggling gym. Now I am sad. Edit 2. Nah, I'm not from any of the places suggested. When he died people gave so much money to make sure he had a proper funeral. Made me wonder where they all were when he was alive. We have the Bandage Man. It's basically a story of a guy who either got cut up, fell into a wood chipper, got into a fight with a bear, it really depends on who you ask, and now wanders the woods along the highway, covered in bandages. If you are unlucky enough to pull over, he'll get in your car and kill you. I just recently saw a flyer on the bulletin board at the local post office asking for people's stories so someone can make a mockumentary. Why would anyone pull over? There's an old summer camp far into the woods near my town. Every kid that goes there learns the story of Skibo Bates. When the camp first opened they had a big bonfire for all the kids that night and some of them started picking on poor young Skibo. He gets shoved and trips into the fire which sets his clothes up in flames and he runs from the beach into the large lake the camp was built near. They never found him that night or recovered his body. The counselors all say if you sneak out of your cabins at night Skibo will find you and take his revenge. Yes, I know it's bullshit to scare and keep the young kids in their cabins at night. My high school is cursed. Every year, there was one suicide and one death from car crash. Every single year. My older sisters went there before me for 5 years. I went for 4 years, and according to the alumni Facebook page, they haven't missed a year since I graduated. In total that is nearly 13 years, and 26 dead kids. And I know I heard about the curse before my sister even went there, so who knows how big the total is. I wonder if the legend is a self-fulfilling prophecy from a suicide standpoint. Knowing that someone else did it makes it easier sort of thing? School superintendent serial killer. There are all kinds of people in my part of Texas who swear they've seen a chupacabra. I haven't, but I did once see 2 enormous cougars jump across the road in front of my car, chasing a deer. Looked like house cats, but 8 feet from nose to tail. I've seen 2 small hairless critter the size of a fox or raccoon, but hairless. I always assumed they were just mangy raccoons. Probably. Some of the sightings are also mangy coyotes. There is a road on the outskirts of town called Constitution. A design paved road that lead to an old-looking farmhouse after about a mile down. The legend is that in this house an entire family of inbred albino people live there and that they will murder anyone who gets too close to the house. It's constantly driven on by teenagers smoking weed and stuff and no one has ever been murdered so. The one time I drove down it however there were a pair of headlights behind my friends and I, which scared the shit out of us and made us turn around. When we turned around the other car was gone that was behind us. It was pretty freaky. It's a very narrow road with a cliff on one side and a steep hill on the other so it's not easy to turn around and disappear. One of the teachers at a local school in the 80s was a Soviet spy. Whether that's true or not, I can confirm that there is indeed a declassified Soviet map of my entire town, including the military base, from the 80s. It's a super detailed map too, more detailed than contemporary American maps. Edit, added link, changed 70s to 80s. The Soviets managed to make maps like this for lots of regions in the US. They were more accurate than some of ours. There is a road in a wooded area near where I live and the street is literally called Hairy Man Road. Legend goes that there was a kid who was separated from his family when they were trying to escape some bad weather, in the 1800s. He ended up surviving alone in the woods and terrorized people who would come through. Eventually he was trampled to death by some people/horses passing by that he tried to scare. I forget how weird the name of the road is until I have to say it out loud. There are Hairy Man festivals each year in my town, and the hairiest man legit wins a prize. So weird lamau. Lol, I'm giggling at the thought of a Hairy Man festival. There's an urban legend in my town about a bus full of children in the 70s that went up Gold Camp Road, this narrow, dirt incline into the mountains, and went over the side, killing everyone on the bus. Legend has it that if you drive up that road and park your car where the bus went over the side, you'll get little handprints all over your car from the ghost children. It's amazing to me how many locals still believe this story. I remember my friend doing this and awaiting the handprints. She said they never came. There's a rundown mansion outside of the small town I grew up in. Story is back in the day the owners had a massive house party, but the second floor collapsed due to the weight and killed several. The dude who owns it legit lives next to it in a small trailer. The driveway is really long and covered with trees. So we would try to see who could get closest to the house before he noticed and started shooting his rifle in the air. I don't think kids mess with it that much anymore though. If it's that rundown, he probably couldn't afford to fix it and it was cheaper to buy a trailer to live in. I see that a lot with old properties and always think it's a shame. There's this dentist that owns about 18 all-black houses in my city and everyone's convinced he is a Satanist. The first clue to me was that he was a dentist. There's a small private boarding school in my town. The local rumor when I was in high school was that Bill Murray's son goes there. I think this may have actually been true at one time and people just kept saying it long after he left. This is the most mystical and thought-provoking tale of the thread. Some people built a house in our town. It's a waterfront property with a swimming pool for some reason, it's surrounded by a security fence and even has spotlights. People in town referred to the place as Mafia Retreat. I met the people who live there, they're the second owners. Although we don't know much about the original owners, the people who live there currently had it officially renamed to Mafia Retreat. Kids would always talk about a bridge called Gibbs Bridge being haunted and they would go there and like middle school to be edgy kids. There were about 1,000 different stories about why it's haunted but everyone claims they've seen ghosts or heard the pickup truck of the dead guy. I crossed the bridge once, it's barely even a bridge and it's just over a tiny creek and it's just full of graffiti and in the middle of the country. Edit. Upon further investigation this is more than just a local legend. It's a legitimate place that has been recognized as a very haunted by ghost chasers and such. Last year on Mother's Day a guy walked into my town's only grocery store carrying a severed head. It was his mom's head BTW. He stabbed a worker of the store and went absolutely batty. No matter how many people I explain it to, they all think he was from our little podunk town. He wasn't. He walked about 10 to 12 miles to take his mom to the store on Mother's Day. It's kind of been a blessing and a curse really. Weird hipsters stay away from our town, thinking it is filled with nut jobs. While crazy homeless druggies flock to our town like it's Mecca. That the farmers are cannibals. Not sure why this was passed around. Wasn't this the plot of an X-Files episode? A cannibalism ring run through the local chicken processing plant. Torchwood did it too. And back in the 80s every BBC show had farmers practicing the occult with human sacrifices. There's a rural road just outside of town that people say is haunted. One time some friends and I drove over there and we were driving real slow kinda just giggling and shit and a cop pulls us over and tells us to leave. I think a lot of teens just go there to smoke and shit. Blucifer, the demon bronco of the Denver airport. Basically, this sculptor designed a giant rearing blue Mustang statue to put in front of the Denver airport. Denver's the home of the Broncos football team, whose colors are blue and orange. Before it was finished, however, it collapsed onto and killed the sculptor. That, plus the fact that its eyes glow red at night and that it just generally looks terrifying, has created the local legend that it's sentient, demonic, and steals the souls of tourists passing through the airport. Every time I fly I say a brief prayer as I drive by, asking Lord Blucifer to stay his rage and grant me safe passage. Maybe relevant? He's definitely a local legend. Emperor Norton. He was born in England and moved to San Francisco around the gold rush. Initially a well-respected businessman, he lost everything he owned with a risky investment in Peruvian rice. He faded into obscurity for a few years, maybe even left the Bay Area for a while, before returning to prominence in 1859 by unilaterally declaring himself Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico. He promptly began issuing decrees such as, "Whoever after due and proper warning shall be heard to utter the abominable word Frisco, which has no linguistic or other warrant, shall be deemed guilty of a high misdemeanor, and shall pay into the imperial treasury as penalty the sum of $25. And whereas, we issued our decree ordering the citizens of San Francisco and Oakland to appropriate funds for the survey of a suspension bridge from Oakland Point via Goat Island, also for a tunnel, and to ascertain which is the best project, and whereas the said citizens have hitherto neglected to notice our said decree, and whereas we are determined our authority shall be fully respected, now, therefore, we do hereby command the arrest by the army of both the boards of city fathers if they persist in neglecting our decrees. Given under our royal hand and seal at San Francisco, this 17th day of September, 1872. He also minted his own currency. It was all the bogus ramblings of a crazy person, but true to San Francisco's quirky spirit, the city basically played along. His favorite establishments accepted his currency as payment, and when he died, the Chronicle ran a headline reading "L'Roi mort," and some accounts say 30,000 people lined the streets for his procession, which was well over one-tenth the entire city's population at the time. His bridge/tunnel decree was prescient, as today there is a suspension bridge between Oakland and San Francisco via Goat Island, now called Yerba Buena Island, and there is also an immersed tube carrying BART trains between the two cities. There was a community push to rename the bridge after him recently, but sadly it failed. I've lived in several towns, ones with populations from 100,000 to 5,000 people. There's always a group of people, usually moderately successful in business, who party hard together. The rest of the town are convinced there's partner swapping/sharing going on at these gatherings. Never been any evidence and no one's seen it, but have always heard from a friend of a friend who was at the party, but left when the shenanigans started. Hey, it's probably happened occasionally, but every time? I've had the same experience, but with Freemasons and Satan-worshipping Satanists being added to the story as the towns get smaller. The Beast of Bray Road. A long run of cryptid sightings during the 80s and 90s, something between Bigfoot and the Wolfman. The people telling the story certainly seemed to believe there was something out there. What exactly it might have been was never determined. Probably just a deadhead or fish fan who took a bunch of acid and got lost. Chapel Hill, Tennessee. The story varies based on who tells it, but I'll tell you the gist. Long ago, when train tracks had to be manually switched, a switch operator was killed by an oncoming train. Legend has it that to this day you can see him carrying his lantern down the tracks. People have reported it moving through their cars when stopped on the tracks at night. There are videos on YouTube of the light. Chapel Hill is a small town, so the lights from an airplane or lights from cars going X direction don't explain it. Most people around here, if pressed, would tell you they tend to believe it due to so many people experiencing it. Native West Texan. La Llorona, El Chupacabra, and aliens are very real to us. El Chupacabra is usually blamed for livestock deaths, sheep and goats on small ranches. People will buzz about it for a day or two and it'll be over. No offense to sheep, but they're dumb enough to accidentally kill themselves, and I don't think they need much help. La Llorona wasn't part of my collective conscience until I was older. But people keeping their kids away from rivers was very common in my area, though absolutely with good reason, because water quality and flash flooding made it sketchy at best. Aliens? Now that's the one I'm more willing to believe. West Texas is extremely empty, in case you've never been, so you see strange lights in some of the darkest and most isolated parts of the country? That's weird. That's worth suspicion. One very localized one was told to me by my Spanish teacher in high school: the Ghost Motel up one of the highways outside of town. It looked like a 50s drive-in motel, and when he first moved here it was open, people were there, lights were on, and he stopped and talked to the desk clerk asking for directions. When he got into town, allegedly he mentioned it to his neighbor and they told him the place had been closed for 30 years. He drove back, and sure enough it was boarded up, abandoned, and in awful shape. People made a habit of going out there on dares, and there's been a few weird stories, but I'm suspicious of the merit to them. The Manchester Pusher. Manchester, England is a city with a large downtown canal and river network. There's an urban legend that a serial killer is active who wanders the city's waterways and pushes people into the water and leaves them to drown. According to the local police, there were 28 unexplained deaths in the water between 2008 and 2014. Family members of some of these victims insist that their loved one's death was no accident, even though the police have written off the pusher as an urban legend. The Hoop Snake. Indigenous to the Mississippi and the Minnesota/Wisconsin area. It's a snake that bites its tail and chases you like a hula hoop. That visual is weirdly funny, tbh. There is this old abandoned underway of this bridge that is supposedly haunted, and if you walk too far in it you'll be cursed. So no one did it for the longest time until some guys at my high school finished the walk, and all it is now is people smoking weed. I don't think it was ever haunted, I just come from a very gullible town. People from St. Louis collectively believe someone in St. Louis invented the crab rangoon, but that's totally untrue. There's one road in the town I was born in that's supposedly one of the most haunted places in New Jersey. It's called Clinton Road, and it's a really long stretch with all forest on one side and a lake on the other with no fence in between or street lights. People have reported seeing headlights behind them then turning around and there's no car there, seeing phantom hitchhikers, etc. My favorite story though is that there's the ghost of a little boy there that will throw your coins back into the road if you toss them into the lake. One time when my brother and I were little, we threw a coin into the lake to see if it would happen, and my dad noticed, so he slyly threw another one out the window and into the street. We figured it out eventually, but he scared the shit out of us LMFAO. So the high school I went to has a trailer with a crawl space under it that is on a hill, so if you go under it from the front and go as far as you can, you'll eventually hit hill. When I was in high school I made up a story to the freshmen who wanted to go under there to smoke that a kid disappeared back there and nobody ever found his body, and it was thought that a hobo or meth head ate him. That scared them, and I guess they told their parents or someone at school about it, and the cops came and brought a K-9 unit to investigate because apparently there was a missing kid from the school. I wasn't aware. Obviously they didn't find anything, but my nephew goes to that school now, 6 years later, and the seniors still tell the freshmen about the cannibal hobo under the trailer. Guess my story was just feasible enough to stick. Thanks for listening to another episode of Reddit X. Subscribe and activate the notification bell so you won't miss any stories. Feel free to share your own stories below in the comments. Have a good day.